Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and one of my favorite things to do on L'Chaim is to give you a chance to hear some of the most brilliant rabbinic minds in the world today, who articulate the genius and beauty of the Jewish tradition, what Judaism, Torah, is all about, and how the value system of the Jewish people has made a marvelous, unparalleled contribution to Western civilization. And personally, I just love the chance to be able to talk with them about their views of contemporary Jewish life and aspects of the Jewish tradition. Well, on this edition of L'Chaim, I'm so pleased to welcome back a fabulous scholar and teacher of Judaism with an unusual gift to articulate the arc of Jewish history, a wonderful teacher who's able to take some of the most profound aspects of Jewish tradition, Jewish culture, Jewish history, and make them accessible to any group he teaches. His name is Rabbi Ken Spiro. He's senior lecturer and researcher for Aish HaTorah in Jerusalem, the author of a number of outstanding books, including Crash Course in Jewish History, From Abraham and the Birth of Monotheism to the Holocaust and the Creation of Israel, World Perfect, the Jewish Impact on Civilization, and his most recent book, Destiny, Why Such a Tiny Nation Plays Such a Huge Role in History. And Ken Spiro, it is wonderful to have you back on L'Chaim. Thank you so very, very much. By the way, Ken Spiro also happens to be a superb tour guide licensed by the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. So if you're planning a trip to Israel, you'd be very wise to think of Ken Spiro. It is wonderful to have you back at this table. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Why Destiny, by the way? We have not spoken since your latest book. What was the idea here? I understand the first two. What's Destiny all about, Ken?
Well, you know, I'm a big lover of these epic Hollywood movies.
Yes.
And I noticed whether it's Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Matrix, they all have a similarity of plot. The story beats of the world descends to darkness. There's a cosmic struggle of good and evil. There's a little superhero who doesn't even know he's the hero. You know, the fate of the world rests in the balance. He doesn't even want the job, but he just can't escape it because his role is too significant. Mm-hmm. He has a series of encounters with the bad guy that should end very badly. He always manages to survive, sometimes barely. All his strengths come out. Like there's much more to him than we see initially. In the end, there's always this cosmic struggle. You know, the big showdown, whether it's, you know, Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader or, you know, Harry Potter versus Voldemort, and evil's destroyed, good wins, and that balance is reestablished. And I noticed, you know, as a historian and a rabbi, I put the two together, that those are the story beats of Jewish history. And, you know, we run off to all these movies because we want to escape our mundane reality. And we Jews collectively are the protagonists in the stories. So you don't have to run off to the movie. We're living it.
Yes. But wait, I love the fact, and I want you to show the audience, show it together. Show them, there's your camera. Show them what this is here.
Well, because I wanted to keep people in while they're reading through the book, because it's just a series of themes in Jewish history, anti-Semitism, Jewish impact on the world, but I wanted people to keep the theme of this Hollywood movie in mind. So I had my colleague in this is a very talented artist. His name is Yariv Newman, and he worked in Hollywood, and I had him we did together, these are as if a creative team was sitting down to lay out the scenes in a movie, like a Jewish action film. Storyboard, exactly. Of this, it's not directly related to the theme of the book, the plot of the book at all. People think it's like a cartoon book. It's not. It's a serious history book. But it's to keep people in mind that we're dealing with, you know, the story beats, and that they realize that that's this whole Hollywood theme that runs through the book. Who knows? Maybe we'll make it into a movie also. It'd probably be a good action film.
As long as I get to show it on JBS.
Absolutely.
One of the themes in Destiny is a theme you've dealt with a lot recently, is anti-Semitism. And you do a whole evening on what's the reason behind anti-Semitism. But as you write Destiny, have your thought changed at all? Have the events of the last couple of years in any way reshaped some of your thinking? Speak to me right now about your sense of where the Jewish people are in the fight against anti-Semitism. What is it? Where is it? What bothers you about it?
Yeah, so my thoughts haven't changed, but they've sort of been amplified, because what has changed since the last time we spoke was the level of anti-Semitism in the world has gone up significantly. I mean, the number one focus of Jew hate is hiding behind Israel bashing, which is just the final sort of excuse that anti-Semitism is taking in modern history. But in general, we're seeing anti-Semitism, forget the delegitimization of Israel and the BDS movement on campuses. You know, I live in Israel, but I'm always following the news in America. The level of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents in the United States is going through the roof. I heard a statistic that Jews are like 1.7% of the population in the US, but targets of something like 58% of the hate crime. And in New York, there's all kinds of incidents. And now you have synagogue shootings, things that I never imagined would have taken place in America. So it seems like it's intensifying. And it's sort of in keeping with this whole theme of that last book I wrote, you know, the greatest danger, that final showdown, is at the end. And if it's true that we do play this critical role, despite our teeny size, you know, 0.2% of the world's population, but if it's true that we're approaching that final scene, so to speak, as we approach from the Jewish historical perspective that Messianic era, then one would only expect that the threat level is going to go up. You know, we're like at DEFCON 5 or whatever term they use in terms of, so I think Jews everywhere in the world are getting really uncomfortable. In Israel, we're kind of used to it. Europe, they've been going through this for years. The big difference I see is America. People are really on edge now with all this stuff happening. So it just seems to me that it's just a further sort of proof of the scenario as laid down traditionally by Judaism is actually coming to fruition. And what I always say, my big message is now, because one of the great Achilles heels of the Jewish people is the infighting. We're always focusing on what makes us different. I'm Reform, you're Orthodox, you know, Democrat, Republican. I always say that people who hate us don't care our political or religious affiliation. In Auschwitz, there weren't like different lines. Reform, conservative, Orthodox, left-wing, right-wing. The people who hate us look at us as Jews. And we have to learn to do the same thing. But what anti-Semitism, I think, is really doing is getting us to recognize that. Just like if you live in Israel, anyone who lives in Israel, I just taught a bunch of Israelis, and I said, what's the one time that all Israelis really seem to get along really well? And everyone yelled out when there's a war. Mm-hmm. Because when someone is really killing us, then we put those little differences aside, which are really trivial, and we focus on what we have in common, which is why they're really coming after us. Because we're all in the same boat together, with the same destiny.
Okay, I want to say this gently to you because I know my voice in this area is not mainstream at the moment, but I want to say it to you anyway, and then I want to hear what you have to say. I don't know any Jew who's on edge. That's number one. Number two, I can give you instances where other synagogues were shot up, where Jewish federations were shot up, where Jewish centers were shot up. And from my perspective, the phenomenon is not that people are out to get Jews. There are lunatics on the American scene who'll shoot up a black church. That's not anti-Semitic. Who'll go into a gay bar and shoot up a gay bar. Who also will shoot up things that have no relevance to minorities. They'll shoot up, you know, rock concerts. There are people who at the moment are just very, very mentally disturbed, and whomever they happen to hate that day, they hate. Do I think that the shootings, the shooting in Pittsburgh and outside of San Diego, just horrific. I'm not in any way minimizing it. And my empathy for the families that have to deal with the aftermath of that, my heart goes out to them. I'm not trivializing in any way their pain. I'm talking about in an academic setting, through JBS to the entire Jewish America, and to some extent now, since we're global, online, including in Israel, I'm speaking to Jews all over the world. I recognize that there's virulent anti-Semitism in Europe. anti-Semitism that in some way is even structural. And I don't see the governments of Europe trying to clamp down on it. In America, it's a very different phenomenon, except for the fact that for the first time I'm seeing members of Congress on the edges of anti-Zionism, what I consider to be anti-Semitic. There's no institutional anti-Semitism, and while there's a much higher percentage of Jewish anti-Semitic incidents, I keep pointing out it's in absolute numbers very, very small. And I don't know any Jew who would be worried to wear a yarmulke anywhere in the United States, as opposed to people will not wear yarmulkes in England unless they wear a baseball cap over it, and they're afraid to walk in the streets of Paris, let alone the outside, with a chai or with a mezuzah or with a yarmulke. So that what I keep wanting to say to the American Jew, we must always be vigilant. What is happening is very concerning, but no Jew should be afraid in the United States of America. That's my take. I want to hear what you say.
First of all, I agree. It isn't. I walk around. I speak all over the world. I go everywhere in the United States and Canada, wearing my yidlit, as I say.
You won't take your kippah off anywhere in America?
No. And I'm in Europe, I wear a baseball cap.
Yes.
In America, I've never taken a kippah off, and I don't. And I'm not saying that America's like Europe. What I am saying with the broad perspective is, yeah, it's still very safe to be a Jew in the United States, but things are shifting. And it's a subtle thing. It's not, Germany and then Hitler's in power. But I see a slide. Like you said, there are people in the U.S. Congress who are openly hostile to Israel. You're seeing a shift on a certain political level in the upper strata, which has inferences that are even somewhat openly anti-Semitic. It's all about the Benjamin comments and stuff like that, which is really has a lot more to do than just going after Israel. But it's a shift that's slight. First of all, people go back to sleep. I was in the States speaking when the synagogue shooting took place in Pittsburgh, and people were I was in a hotel with hundreds of Jews, and people were freaking out because it was like, synagogue. You're right. There's a lot of craziness stuff going on in the world. What happens to us never happens in a vacuum. I would say what happens to us is the mini version of what's happening in the world in general. Evil tends to like to focus on us, but we don't have, thank God, exclusive ownership of all the bad stuff that happens. So while America, I think, is I agree, 100% way behind the situation in Europe, where I do not walk around. I mean, I've been to London 30 times. I was with my kids in the streets of London a few years ago, and we played this game, sort of like, see if you can go 20 seconds without spotting a burqa. Just as a game. That's just the women. I mean, people should walk around freely everywhere, not be afraid of whatever their affiliation, Sikhs, Muslims, whatever. But the Muslims could walk around openly in London. I was very uncomfortable. There was no way I was going to walk in downtown London wearing a kippah. I would be afraid that something would happen to me. But on the other hand, I see recently in New York and Brooklyn, where there's a close interaction in a lot of Orthodox communities with other minorities, that there have been a number of very violent incidents of people just, getting punched and hit with bricks and things like that, because they're identifiable easily, especially ultra-Orthodox Jews. So there seems to be more of that going on, but I agree. It's not where it's at in Europe. I say Europe is ending for Jews. It's more or less shutting down. I always say as a historian, because I'm a big believer in the big picture, that North America, and specifically the United States, is the last diaspora haven for Jews in the world. Until we all come back to Israel, hopefully, because I'm a big Zionist.
Is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism?
Yeah, absolutely.
Explain why.
I mean, first of all, it is. Natan Sharansky brings this down beautifully. To always scream anti-Semite when someone criticizes Israel is not right either. So Sharansky gives the famous 3 Ds. Natan Sharansky is the former prisoner of Zion, former minister, former head of the Jewish Agency.
Prisoner of Zion, he was a refusnik, a prisoner in the former Soviet Union.
Exactly. He was, for many years, involved in the Soviet Jewry.
And by the way, it is amazing that I think I have to explain who he is.
I'm sure you probably had him on a show.
It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But people don't know. It's already in the past. Thank God.
Yes.
Soviet Jewry is. But he says the 3 Ds. when you delegitimize Israel, when Israel has no right to exist, and Israel's the only country in the world whose very existence is questioned, whose capital city is not recognized. Well, we had to change in that slightly. When you have a double standard,
Why slightly?
It's changed. Well, still most countries do not recognize Jerusalem as the capital. Right. The big change was the United States and a few other countries. Or that double standard, which really drives me nuts. When you ignore all of the huge human rights tragedies in the world, dealing with millions of people, violence, and you only focus on Israel, and the demonization. When you paint this picture of Israelis killing Palestinians to use their organs to sell in the international organ market and things like that. So that stuff is clearly the openly anti-Semitic thing. And I think the majority of people who are going after Israel have a deeper agenda. But certainly it is legitimate to criticize Israel's policies, but it has to be done in the context of a larger worldview. Israel is a little beacon of democracy, free market, capitalist, developed, multicultural, multiracial country, and the worst neighbor on the planet Earth. And rather than focus on all the neighbors who are behaving much worse, people just go nuts on Israel. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot going on there that has a lot more to do than just with politics in the Middle East.
You were born where again?
I was born in Brooklyn, and I grew up in New Rochelle.
Okay. You know America intimately. And you and I grew up in an age, first we were typical young liberal kids, and we believe very, very strongly in the notion of bipartisan congressional support for the state of Israel. There's some concern at the moment that within the Democratic Party there is some erosion of support for the state of Israel, and there are some Jews who are critical. And when Jews are critical, they're told, don't exacerbate the problem of nonpartisanship. Don't make it seem as if the Democratic Party is any less committed to Israel, because what we want to do is constantly reinforce the nature of bipartisan support for Israel. Mm-hmm. You have a unique perspective, Ken, because you're both Israeli and American. What is your answer to the question, should American Jews be concerned about the direction the Democratic Party is taking when it comes to bipartisan support for the state of Israel?
I would say not as the party as a whole. The mainstream Democratic Party is totally lined up behind Israel, as it's always been. And the vast majority of Jews in America are Democratic supporters. What's worrying is that it's more the hard left side of the Democratic Party, which is part of a bigger issue you see in the world. I call it the Green-Red Alliance. It doesn't make sense superficially, but there's a huge alliance between the hard left and radical Islam and Islamic sympathy, which part of that is pro-Palestinian sympathy and anti-Israel. So there is a segment of what's going on in the Democratic Party which is very worrying. And when you have people calling for a serious reevaluation of American support for Israel, but I agree 100%. I think it's very, as a marketing strategy, you don't want to be focusing on the split. You want to be focusing on pushing the unity. But to the extent that America is splitting politically so extreme, it's only exacerbating that. Everything becomes an issue that you're sort of taking sides on. And to the extent that the Republican Party, which has a strong evangelical Christian base, which is a strong pro-Israel base, is pushing towards support of Israel, I think you're even getting somewhat of reaction the other way to a certain level in American politics. Like that this is too fundamentalist and we have to stand back and be more objective about it and hold Israel to the same standard. And I believe Israel should be held to the same standard as every other country, just not to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. We have nothing to apologize for. So there is something wearing there, but I don't think it's the Democratic Party as a whole. I actually feel bad for the mainstream Democratic Party because they are being yanked so far off what is the traditional Democratic position on a lot of issues.
Develop that idea for me, because you've touched on what I'm very concerned about. At the beginning, my reaction was, okay, whether it's Cortez or whether it's Omar, whether it's Tlaib, they're fringe voices within the Democratic Party. And then they begin to say outrageous things about Israel. And what bothers me is that the grown-ups in the Democratic Party don't just step on them and say to them, either in private or perhaps it must be done in public. I'm sorry, what you're saying is factually wrong. The Palestinians did not facilitate Jewish immigration to Palestine during World War II. They did not. They worked to help Hitler destroy the Jews. How could somebody say, well, you know, it makes me feel good to know my Palestinian people, even though they lost their home, they lost their identity, the Jews took it all, but at least they did something good. They helped the Jews come to Palestine. No, they did not. And I don't know, you know, I talk to people who say to me, Ken, the problem is the grown-ups in the Democratic Party don't know enough history themselves. I ask, are you telling me Pelosi doesn't know the history of the Middle East to the extent to which she can say to a Talib or an Omar, you're out of your mind? I'm upset that the grown-ups are not saying to the extreme left publicly, this is unacceptable and it does not represent mainstream democratic politics. I don't hear that. That's what upsets me. And you say?
I say, first of all, I think if I could get someone like Nancy Pelosi, probably Chuck Schumer knows better. But I have a feeling that some of them aren't that knowledgeable on the history of the Middle East. They might be more knowledgeable on the history of the U.S. relationship with Israel and American politics and foreign aid issues to Israel. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't know that much. But I think what's really going on is it's part of this kind of package deal of that hard left. And I think the mainstream Democratic Party is very scared that their base is being drawn far over, so they're loath to go after. And I agree, some of these people are just either incredibly stupid or deliberately nasty or a combination of both, and they get away with saying things that just go unchallenged. I'm sure you do the same thing. I find myself when I'm watching the news with CNN or Fox, and they're showing a clip, I just start yelling, like, stop, like, contradict her. It's a complete lie. Why don't, I think there's a general problem with journalists in general when they're interviewing people that I notice all the time, that they do not take people to task, like live, for things they say wrong because they feel they have to be really nice to them for some reason when they're interviewing them. But many times I'm just like, where did you get that from?
It reinforces the lie.
Yeah, but exactly. But I think that's really, the big fear, I think, has, in someone like, if I could jump into Nancy Pelosi's head, it's her fear that the whole Democratic Party is being pushed that way. And I think
well, doesn't she have a responsibility to stand up and pull back?
But I think that the whole younger part of the Democratic Party is
okay, but
is
this
sympathetic
flies in
towards
the
that.
face of what you said a moment ago. And this is what I hear all the time. You know, Mark, don't worry. It's just the far left.
No.
No.
The whole party's going that way. You see mainstream candidates kowtowing to whether it's the economic agenda of the left, which is like openly almost socialist. What Bernie Sanders opened up as the extreme candidate, he now has people who are way past him and much younger saying the same thing. The difference is I think Bernie Sanders truly appreciates this. This is where his head has been for decades. And now I think there's people who understand it a lot less, pushing it, but they're much more sellable because they're 50 years younger. Someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a lot more sellable than Bernie, who I give a lot more credit. He's an idealist. I don't agree with his idealism, but he's an idealist. And I just think that is, I think they feel that because America is so polarized, that if they don't keep one foot in that camp, they're going to lose the elections because there's just too many young voters who find this whole package.
Okay, I want to point out gently to you that's a contradiction of what you said earlier. What you said earlier was there was a mainstream Democratic Party who was as pro-Israel as it's always been, and there was just this fringe on the left. Now you're saying you're afraid that fringe on the left is going to pull the entire Democratic Party so that when it makes policy, and who cares what somebody says, we care about policy. What you said before is very important. I hope people hear you. What bothered you is there are people in Congress now suggesting we should question and perhaps even curtail financial aid to Israel, which is really military aid to Israel. So my question is, it's upsetting to hear lunatics on the far left. My question, I'm asking a third time, to what extent is Ken Spiro worried that there's a movement of the Democratic Party for political reasons that will ultimately be down to the ill of the state of Israel?
Yeah, so long term I believe there is. It's not an immediate thing, and I don't think the Israel issue is the main issue. What I'm talking about really is the economics, the socialist platform of how many mainstream candidates who are not 29 years old.
Socialism is bad for Jews?
Well, socialism was invented by Jews.
Is it bad for Jews?
Socialism doesn't, socialism doesn't, in my opinion as a historian, really doesn't work. Judaism is capitalism with a conscience, in my opinion. It's not rabid, like make profit. If you know Jewish law, it's taking care of workers and the poor and the oppressed, and you have a lot of social responsibility and proactivity. But I'm a big believer that, there's a great quote from Bolingbroke, who's a British lord from the 18th century. He said, "History is philosophy with examples." And I always say 100 years ago, a capitalist and a communist could have argued about which economic system was destined to the world to evolve towards. And it's pretty clear that after 100 years of human history, communism, although very well intended, has caused an incredible amount of death and suffering in this world. And I believe, purely as a historian, that it's an economic system which runs against human nature and does not work anywhere. But yet we keep trying it over and over again. And coming with it, unfortunately, we've seen massive human rights violations, because part of that whole worldview is the negation of the individual in these huge communist societies where it's all about the party and the goal of the party and building the country, so the individual becomes negated, and then you have economic collapse and massive personal suffering. So socialism, in my opinion, is not good for Jews. Capitalism with a conscience.
I love that. Capitalism with a conscience.
That's William F. Schumacher that wrote the book. Small is Beautiful. It's not about unbridled wealth and unending greed, but it's about rewarding people for hard work, not punishing them for being successful, yet making people realize it's not just about the money. It's about using what you have in whatever way you can, whether it's your abilities, your finances, to give back to the world in some way.
I understand what drives a young Jew to be enthralled with socialism. The young Jew looks around, there is so much poverty, there's so much pain, there's so much disparity between rich and poor, that there's this desire to make nobody should suffer. And how do we do that? We raise them up. How do we raise them up? Well, the only way we pay for it is we take away from some of the wealth of those who have more wealth than they need. And as a result, it looks idealistic. And I understand this obsession by the Jew to care for the oppressed. That's ingrained in us. And if the oppressed are economically oppressed, then the system should be changed. The problem is, and you've described it so well, socialism is not the answer. Capitalism with a conscience comes as close in this imperfect world as we can possibly get. Yes?
100%. And you're on a very interesting point about Jews feeling it. I do a whole talk, which is in my book. It's called Driven, about the spiritual genetics of what really sets Jews apart.
Oh, yes.
And one of those is radically transformative thinking. I mean, non-Jews can be radical, but Jews are disproportionately radical. Drive, chutzpah, that nerve. Jews are disproportionately driven and disproportionately overaccomplished, and they care. And we say it comes from Abraham. This was him. To connect to an infinite, invisible God when the whole world is worshiping idols, that's radical. To put it all on the line and be willing to die for those ideas when most people would kill you for even saying them, that's drive, that's chutzpah. And his original outreach technique was that tent with 4 doors to invite guests from all sides. I emulate God. He gives unconditionally, I give unconditionally. So you can't look at it in a microscope, like you can look at your DNA, but Jewish genetics are so clearly demonstrated. And what you point out is great, because I say take any cause to make the world a better place, any political ideology, communism, socialism, feminism, black civil rights, anti-apartheid, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. If it isn't founded by a Jew, it's run by a Jew. Because nothing gets a Jewish soul that could be completely disconnected from Judaism, like a Bernie Sanders, more excited than social justice, fixing the world. So you're right, we're driven to it. So we will either create or gravitate towards any of these ideologies. Edmund Wilson, he's an American literary critic from the mid-19th century, had the best quote. He said, "The Jew lends himself easily to communism because it's a high cause involving all of humanity, characteristics which are natural to him as a Jew." We love always trying to fix the world, but that's why it's so important that you have to take that raw drive and give it some Torah software, some Jewish value software, to balance that intention for doing good with a higher moral code, so you know where to. Otherwise, you end up, getting really crazy political ideologies and causes that are even antithetical to Judaism, even though they come from very well-intended Jews.
That's beautifully said. Okay, so we both understand what drives the Jew to be such an idealist, and that it seems on the surface that socialism, if not communism, why did communism, I mean, Jews, as you say, communism was started by Jews. There were Jews who were drawn to it. Your early kibbutzim in Israel were attempts to be experiments in communism
100%.
without the government, the government foot. And at the same time, we understand that the Jewish tradition is not socialism or communism, and that the Jewish tradition has a profound respect for the Yetzer Hara. I want you to explain to our audience the profundity of the insight that human nature is not only made up of a Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, but that the rabbis say, were it not for the Yetzer Hara, all the things that you just described, from the rabbinic perspective, none of it would happen. And that what is necessary to do as a Jewish people, as a sacred community, any community, is to work with that Yetzer Hara in human beings and to channel it for constructive, positive, socially building, family building ends. But I want you to talk about, from your perspective, because I've never asked this to you before. Pretend you're talking to somebody who's never heard the term Yetzer Hara. Explain to our audience what we're talking about.
So the Yetzer Hara is called the evil inclination.
Yes.
There's the good inclination, there's the evil inclination.
Who has it?
We all have it.
We all have
Every human, by the way, it's a very interesting point that it's very clear from the Agada to the stories in the Talmud that to be great, you have to have a big Yetzer Hara.
Yes.
People who, I always say, people who don't have big Yetzer Haras tend to be nice, mediocre kind of people, living very mediocre kind of lives. You know, I always say this as a historian, and I'm the historian and rabbi. I say, to do great good or great evil in this world, you have to have greatness, which is why Lincoln was great, Roosevelt was great, and Hitler and Mao Zedong were great. They were just great in different ways. But it's precisely the Yetzer Hara that gives you the energy, because we Jews are not about, it's interesting, because Jews have a very non-Jewish, a lot of Jews have a very non-Jewish idea about holiness and spirituality. We've even absorbed even a Christian ascetic or an Eastern idea that holiness is separation from the physical world. I always tell this story when I'm guiding in Israel and in Sfat, the holy city. And I say, holiness is very daunting. And you know, there's a lot of Jews in Buddhism. They're called Boo Jews. I think 60% of all non-Asian Buddhist leaders have been Jewish. I always say, if not for the Beatles and some Jews, Buddhism would be far less known in the Western world. But whenever you read an account of a Boo Jew, why they went to the ashram, and there's nothing wrong with ashrams and meditating, I'm not ragging on that at all, but they always talk about how great it was to escape the world and hang out in some beautiful environment with no temptation and meditate. It's super easy to be holy in that place. I said, try being holy when you're in the checkout line, late to pick up your kid's carpool, and the woman in front of you is not only unloading her groceries at like a half a mile an hour, but won't stop talking to the cashier, or when you're stuck in traffic. So I said the difference between how we look at the world and other faiths often is it's not about separation, it's about elevation. We don't deny the physical, we take the physical and we elevate it. But you have to have a desire for it, which is why everything, unlike, let's say, the Catholic Church, which the ultimate is, to be celibate. Judaism says, no, that sexuality, for instance, can be, in the proper context, the highest form of connection and bonding between two human beings, or it could be the lowest, most denigrating thing in the world. Food. You could be a gluttonous pig, or you can have a Shabbat meal, which is a spiritual experience. You're taking something very physical. You're having an experience. You're sitting, you're talking, you're eating, you're appreciating. So it's all neutral. It's how we use it. But to use it, you got to have a system. But you're right. You have to have that Yetzer Hara.
Did Moses have a Yetzer Hara?
Everyone does.
No, that's not a good enough answer.
Absolutely. Moses had a Yetzer Hara.
Huge.
Huge, of course he had.
And that's not you. It's not Mark and Ken saying it. The Jewish tradition says this.
Yeah, and he's arguing with God. But you have to be. He would not have been Moses if he had been. It took someone like Moses. Look where he grew up, by the way. The greatest of Moses is he grew up in one of the most hostile environments, totally assimilated amongst the Gentiles. He could have easily given up on that he overcame that and stayed connected to his people and wasn't sucked into that and used all of his greatness in the right way Jews, there's been many Jews in history. It's one of my 10 PhD theses I'm never going to write about, Jews living in positions of power amongst non-Jews is a fascinating topic. The ones who take it and run with it for the Jewish people, and the ones who become some of the biggest self-hating anti-Semites in the world. Moses is a great example of the former, that he really, has a tremendous Yetzer Hara. Everyone does. It's a problem even in the Orthodox Jewish world, where they try and write the Yetzer Hara out of these rabbinic characters, that they were righteous from birth and never any temptation. When the reality is the kids, these great rabbis, when they were little, they didn't want to get up to go pray either. That's the historical reality of it. But now we paint it that he never missed ever a minyan and praying in the morning. Of course he did. But that's the human nature. To be great, you got to have a great Yetzer Hara. You got to have something pulling you in a direction. And it's the extent that we are challenging ourselves in either extreme is the extent, and the decisions we make or what we're judged on, that's to the extent that we able to manifest our unique potential and really be great in this world and reach our potential to the greatest extent possible.
And how does Torah help the Jew channel the Yetzer Hara? The insight you're saying is very important for Jews to understand. The Jew does never pretend there is no Yetzer Hara, nor does the Jew ever say he can take it out of one. One must learn to live with the Yetzer Hara. And then what the Jewish tradition teaches is there's a way to learn how to do that, and we call it Torah. But I want to hear you speak to that.
Well, there's a lot of confusion about what Torah is about, by the way, in the non-Orthodox world and in the Orthodox world. In the non-Orthodox world, they are often viewed as a hyper-obsession with minutiae and pots and pans.
Right.
But when the Orthodox world is interesting, because I say this all the time, and I'm going to catch some flack for it, I'm sure, but when I'm teaching audiences of religious Jews, and you ask religious Jews, what's the purpose of being Jewish? And they generally will say one of two things: to serve God, or to learn Torah and do mitzvot, to learn that law and do those commandments. And I say, first of all, serving God is a figure of speech, but that's all it is, because God's infinite. You cannot do anything for infinity. And Torah and mitzvot, and this is the big point, which I believe would be the huge paradigm shift for the Orthodox world, it's a means to an end and not an end in and of itself. And I think that much of the Orthodox world has made Torah and mitzvahs the end game. And what's the end of being Jewish? Torah and mitzvah are a system to keep us intellectually aware and mindful of our actions, that we can, when we're faced with a decision, whether it's what we're going to eat, how we're going to deal with a guy in business, my relationship with my spouse, Torah is giving us guidelines from up there, the big guy, about how we're supposed to make those right decisions, because we're never robbed of our free will. But whether it's about business, marriage, my neighbor, it's only about one thing. Being Jewish is about Kiddush Hashem. And Kiddush Hashem is another term that people in history...
It's an idiom.
It's exactly.
Okay.
Sanctifying God's name.
Yes.
Which when you study in Jewish history, it's great rabbis like Rabbi Akiva being publicly martyred by the Romans to teach Torah to make a point. That's the highest level of Kiddush Hashem, dying for what you believe. And I always say, you only have to make that level of sacrifice when you don't do the Kiddush Hashem we're supposed to individually and collectively be doing every day. And that's the point. As a Jew, I always say our job is to elevate the world. And we have multiple, every day, every Jew, and every human being really, has an opportunity to make a decision that will pull the world in one way or another. And Kiddush Hashem, like I always give a little example of, like, I fly way too much. And unfortunately, since 9/11, airplane travel is really less pleasant than it used to be. And they have zone 1, zone 2, and I'm always zone 4. Like if I don't want my luggage under my seat for the 4-hour flight to LA, so I push some little old lady out of the way to get my carry-on in the last bin above my head, and I'm wearing my kippah, that's a desecration of God's name. But if I get there and I happen to get down, my luggage is above, and the little old lady comes on and I stand up and help her lift her bag and put it up above. I mean, it's called being a mensch in Yiddish, being a nice human being. But if I'm wearing a kippah, that's a Kiddush Hashem. That's what the Jewish people's about. On every level is doing things that people are supposed to look at us and say, look at these Jews. Look at how they live. Look at their families. Look at their marriages. Look at how they raise their kids. Look at how they do business. Look at their communities. Look what they give their time and their resources to. What's their secret? It's all about leading by example, not converting, not conquering. But that's where that Torah system fits in. It's the guidebook to allow us to deal with things and act in a way, but it's the means to that ends of living in a way that inspires first our fellow Jews and hopefully the rest of the world. And God knows, Mark, the world needs some role models. Come on. We definitely need some good role models.
I think that's gorgeous. And by the way, I think you're 100% right. You and I have had other conversations on JBS. We didn't agree all the time. And I don't know the extent to which the agreement was because we didn't quite understand each other. And I argue all the time that while the Jewish tradition absolutely, and the word believe is not the right word, it just accepts as the essence of reality is somewhere in this universe it's all about. There is a God in this universe. But it's not the God depicted in the Torah. The God depicted in the Torah is a metaphoric imagery that is supposed to ultimately drive human beings to the Kiddush Hashem that you have just expressed. That ultimately, the Torah and the Jewish tradition's description of God is an attempt to say, what we want to do is be living God, where that is not an adjective but a gerund. And living God means to do Kiddush Hashem in as little ways as you've just described, and that what we are trying to do is be as lovely human beings as we possibly can, and the entire Jewish construct, all of halakha, which is important, is an attempt to sensitize us more and more to how to be the kind of person who is going to do the Kiddush Hashem with that woman on the plane. To what extent is what I'm saying comfortable to you?
It is, but I would like to add a comment to that. It's because there's, I mentioned this thing about the universalism, the particularism idea.
You haven't yet, and I want to.
But I'm saying there's because what you're talking about is largely the agenda of the non-Orthodox world. It's all about my relationship with my fellow human beings, social justice being, but there's a component of spirituality. I do like the 90-degree angle relationship. This is a huge part of it. Between man and, I know you can't be gender specific anymore, between human beings is a huge part of it, but it's not just about that, because that's just, you could say, nice liberal ideas. It's also about this. It's about taking this and bringing it to this. It's about channeling. When I say this, that's God. Because the other part of it is to recognize that these values, love your neighbor as yourself, it all comes from that. The big disconnect between modern liberalism, in the words of Will Hilbert, who came out with the 1950s, the cut flower ethics. It's a beautiful point that I always speak about. He said cut flowers in a vase look nice for a week, but because they've been severed from their roots, they wither and die. He said so too with the values of our Western civilization. They eventually wither and die, and you can see, he said this 70 years ago, and you see it happening today. You see that what's called maybe the liberal agenda has separated to the point where parts of it are antithetical to the Jewish moral agenda. So it's about that balance. The balance is the key. So when we're doing that as a Jew, what's the difference between me doing it as a Jew or an Orthodox Jew and just anyone being a nice human being? I'm supposed to be doing it, not because I'm expecting a reward, but I'm supposed to be demonstrating that this is the creator of the universe. He gave these values to me because he wants me to be like him, which is one of the 613 commandments. V'chalachta b'drachav, be like God, go in his ways. Like, what does that mean? I sit in the cloud throwing lightning bolts at people? No. It says God is kind and merciful. You're kind and merciful, but you let people know that when you're being kind and merciful, you're doing that because as a Jew, the term, I think I coined the original term, I call ourselves the God Squad, which is why you want to identify as a Jew, because when a Jew does it, the statement we're making is, I'm doing this because I have this unique responsibility. We're all children of God, but he gave me a unique responsibility because of the things that my ancestors chose. God chose me to keep doing them. And my job is to constantly remind humanity that those values that we are the basic values of Western civilization come from that relationship, and we can't go to sleep with it. We got to be vigilant, always vigilant to keep this line going, and that's the job of Jews. So when the Jews, much of the Jewish world just has a nice Jewish soul, but no knowledge of Judaism, but just has all those nice touchy-feely ideas and is not making that connection, they'll often take Jews in many other directions, and those Jews will even give up their Jewish identity because it is so minimal to them. But on the other side, when you get Jews who are overly obsessed with this relationship, which is much of the Orthodox world, sadly, they kind of forget that there was something over there that I have responsibility towards. There's a disconnect.
Yeah, how do you explain that? You know, as I listen to you, I have two reactions. And I understand in a very sweet way the notion that when the Jew does something lovely, although the Jew, he or she is doing it as a human being,
Yeah.
hopefully I want them to do it out of a Jewish neshama. And there is a connection to what the Jew understands, and I don't know if it's literal. Sometimes it's literal for me, Ken, and sometimes it's really poetic for me. That we do it because there is a God in this universe, and to be in harmony with the universe is to do lovely things for people. But I have two problems with the way you describe it. Number one, there honestly are people, really lovely, lovely people, who have none of this.
Yeah.
They think they're happy for you. You want to believe there's a God, good, go. But for them and their view of the world, and I'm not in any way deprecating this, belittling this, making fun of this, for them, this doesn't, I mean, that's a fairy tale. Ken Spiro, in the end, as bright as he is, as lovely as he is, believes in a fairy tale. And those who don't believe in the fairy tale still believe in this. And the question is, how hard do they believe in this? And will they ever compromise because they have no fairy tale? Mm-hmm. You're suggesting the fairy tale is necessary. I have a problem with that, and I do not ever want to rule out the Jew who says, I am committed to the Jewish tradition's articulation of this, even though this to me is a fairy tale. And, by the way, as long as I know it's a fairy tale, I'm happy to speak about it in poetic terms. But the reality is this, and there is no God the way Ken Spiro wants there to be. And number two, you've described every religious person. The person who's wearing the burqa could say to you, I do whatever this is because of this. And the problem with Ken Spiro is, his this is wrong. Not that there is no this, which is what I just described. There's the Jew who says, love you, Ken, but this is a fantasy. Mm-hmm. Then there is the non-Jew who says to you, yes, there is this, but Ken, you got it all wrong. It's Allah. And your responsibility to this isn't to Hashem, it's to Allah. And when you talk, you know, I have nothing else. I'm nothing. People want to be the Buddhists and Jews together. What? Fine. The fact of the matter is that my study of Buddhism is that everything fundamentally they say about the fundamental Buddhist ideology, philosophy, theology is the world's an illusion. Mm-hmm. And the Jewish tradition is the exact opposite. So I never could understand how a Jew who takes Judaism seriously and Buddhism seriously can be a Jew, boo Jew, whatever it is. Just, it makes no intellectual or emotional sense to me. And what I think it is, it's somebody who's really an intellectual. He's not intellectually rigorous. It makes him comfortable. It makes him be happy. But intellectually, I don't understand it at all. So for me, when I hear you say, it's this and this, I don't relate to that. Mm-hmm. I relate to this driven by a Jewish commitment. And the last thing I'll say, and then you answer, they're Orthodox Jews. And I'm saying it more harshly than you just said it. I shouldn't say Orthodox Jews. There are Jews who believe in this very much. And they're committed to halakha. And they're sons of bitches.
Yeah.
And they do terrible things to children. And they do terrible things to friends. And they'll tell you that they are observant, quote, religious Jews. And you'll find them in shul. And they'll get the aliyot. And they give big money. And they're honored. And they're sons of bitches. Mm-hmm. So, For me, I want to know the Jew who's committed to this, baby. And why? I couldn't care less. I don't worry as you do that if you're only committed to this and not this, this won't survive. Mm-hmm. And I know that even if you're committed to this, this often does not survive. Okay.
Nothing like a nice, short, easy question.
Right.
Well, first of all, it's a multi-part answer.
I know.
Number one, and in
But
keeping
it's fun,
with
isn't it?
it's great.
It's fun.
In keeping with the cut flower idea, the way I say it, when I talk about it, as I said, just because, and it answers really all your questions, just because a person says they believe in God doesn't make them a good person. I know people who look very religious, who behave very evilly on many different levels, whatever it is. We're not going to go into details. And I know people who say they don't believe in God, who are incredible human beings who would give you the shirt off their back. So I would say like this, number one, on a micro level, claiming you believe in God or don't is not the make it or break it issue. What I would say, macro, collectively and historically, 100% it is. Going back to, not to pump my own books, but World Perfect, I think clearly demonstrates that the whole collective, this idea, that is Western liberal civilization, its roots are in that relationship. And without that relationship, this relationship, not to one person in one lifetime, personal beliefs, but long-term, over a large number of people, has no future and will morph into, but by the way, what I see, which is I think what's happening on the hard left today, the morphing of liberalism into socialism, which goes into communism, and then all the bad, I'm not saying America's going to have that, but as a byproduct of that disconnect. So that is the number one point, that this whole vision of values, this is one of the first topics I wrote on and I spoke on, and you filmed me doing it years ago in Connecticut, is the impact of monotheism morality is the most foundational thing that there is, period. So from the big perspective in terms of time and source of information, there's no question, 100%. And right, on a personal level, I agree with you. There's a great story about the Rosh Yeshiva of Telz years ago, the yeshiva in Cleveland, when asked, by the way, someone said, Rabbi, what about Orthodox Jews who cheat on their wives and cheat in their businesses? And he answered back, what about Orthodox Jews who drink chocolate milk and eat pork chops on Yom Kippur? And the person said, Rabbi, Orthodox Jews don't drink chocolate milk and eat pork chops on Yom Kippur. And he said, yeah, and they don't cheat on their wives and cheat on their businesses either. They just don't know they're not Orthodox. But I'm saying the same problem in different aspects plagues both spectrums of the Jewish world, the religious world and the non-religious world. And it goes back to my universalism versus particularism thing, that the non-Orthodox world is generally into the universal worldview, the social justice warriors of tikkun olam, fixing the world. And the Orthodox world has tended to, in the last several hundred years, because the threat to Jews, I mean, there's always been a lot, with Holocaust, but since the emancipation, the threat switched from that constant physical threat to the threat of assimilation, from the communists and the Bundists and the secularists and the this and the that. So Jews basically, I always say they self-ghettoized. Just as the walls of the ghettos physically came down, they created walls of, I call it, and this is a big point I have, and I'm going to catch flack for this too, but I have no problem saying it to an audience of very religious Jews. Anyone who lives in the Orthodox world, especially the more Orthodox, to the right world, knows that much of being religious, I call it thou shalt not Judaism. What you don't wear, where you won't go, what you won't eat, what you won't read, where your kids don't go to school, what technology they can't own. And there's something to be said for keeping influences out, but first of all, I always hold it's a very bad marketing strategy to be negative. I always say if Coke's motto is doesn't taste as bad as Pepsi, no one would buy it. And I'm a big believer in, as the Romans say, sivi pacem pari bellum, if you want peace, prepare for war. That the best defense is a good offense. And the fact that so much of the Jewish world, because the Jewish world got so pounded by assimilation, that they went into such a defensive mode, we got a great product. We need to be on the offense. It's enough already. And that's why I got involved in Aish HaTorah. I was like, this is great wisdom for living. We should be spreading the word. People want role models. They want wisdom for living. They want how to be happily married and have, productive, happy lives. So, but unfortunately, a lot of the religious world is very self-insular, very into keeping these kind of stringencies. I always say you have to be twice as careful what comes out of your mouth as what you put in your mouth. That you could have a Jew who only eats super glot kosher, but he'll slander his neighbor, or do something slimy in business. That's not proper Torah. Whereas you could have a Jew who's doing beautifully the commandments. The problem is we identify Jews as those because the whole association of physically looking Jewish is associated with this relationship, not religion. So I hold that there are some Jews who you'd never be able to identify as a Jew who are actually much better Jews than some Jews who look very Jewish but really in a very dark way are not behaving very Jewishly. So it's superficial of us to judge people that way, but both sides need to realize that it's all about that balance. It's about maintaining. You got to have this. I'm sorry. By the way, the Muslims, same thing. They're only taking it from us. Muslims, Christians, good Muslims and good Christians should, by definition, be good human beings because they're getting the values that we brought to the world through the idea of monotheism, that their religions are just the offshoots of ours. So we can argue about whether they replaced us or not, but there's the differences between me and a Christian and a Muslim who truly believes in their faith and me and a pagan. There's a lot bigger difference between me and the pagan guy. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, I think if they're all functioning properly, should get along pretty well. You know, I don't know. I by the way, I speak to a lot of Christian groups. I'm going to be in Nashville speaking to one. And I always have this, at the end of the talk, I say, guys, you know, we can agree to disagree on a few theological points, but we actually have a lot in common. And the world needs role models. So I always tell them, I say, look, here's the deal. You work on doing outreach to the Christian world because they need values, and I'll work on the Jewish world. We'll bring the Messiah. And if he's Jesus, I promise you guys can baptize me.
You are fabulous. I love this. I love it. We're just going to pause, all right?
Yeah.
Just pause. That's all.
Okay.
Relax. Rabbi Ken Spiro, a fabulous teacher of all things Jewish, the author of A Crash Course in Jewish History, World Perfect, The Jewish Impact on Civilization, and Destiny, Why Such a Tiny Nation Plays Such a Huge Role in History. Published by Geffen, all of them easy and brilliant reads. Each should be a part of your home library. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas you heard expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And if you want to be in touch with Ken Spiro, you email me and I will pass your emails on to him. Also remember, you can now take L'Chaim with you anywhere you go on the L'Chaim podcast. You want to hear Ken and me speak with each other, take the podcast with you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.